At 11:43 p.m., under the cold gold lights of a luxury hotel lobby in Singapore, my boss smiled in front of the entire executive team and said, "Find your own way home, loser." Then security took my company badge while 20 people pretended not to look at me. I quietly saved the termination email, picked up my suitcase, and walked into the rain. What none of them realized was that Section 11 of the company travel policy made one tiny mistake catastrophically expensive by sunrise. Singapore always looked unreal at night. Not beautiful in a soft way, beautiful in the way expensive watches looked beautiful behind armored glass, polished, untouchable, cold enough to remind you exactly who belonged and who didn't. The hotel tower reflected silver light across the wet streets below. Endless ribbons of headlights slid through downtown traffic like streams of molten metal. Somewhere far beneath the 43rd floor ballroom, music from the marina drifted across the humid air, blurred by rain and distance. Inside, everything smelled like money. Dark wood, citrus perfume, imported whiskey, freshly polished marble, and humiliation. A waiter passed beside me carrying crystal glasses, while conversations floated through the room in low executive tones. Mergers, forecasts, percentages, acquisitions. The kind of conversations people used as weapons, while pretending they were just networking. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy blazer and checked my phone again. 11:37 p.m. Still no response from Ethan, not even a read receipt. Which was strange because tonight's presentation had been his obsession for 3 months. Global expansion, Asian logistics contracts, a $78 million restructuring proposal designed to make him look brilliant in front of the board. Technically, I was only operations support. Unofficially, I had built half the presentation while Ethan collected applause for it. Every spreadsheet, every regional compliance correction, every travel coordination issue, every overnight emergency call with vendors in 3 countries. He spoke confidently because I made sure disasters never reached the room. That was our relationship. Ethan performed. I prevented fires. And for 5 years, somehow, that arrangement had worked. Until Singapore. "Still babysitting your inbox?" The voice arrived before the whiskey did. Vanessa, Senior HR Director, perfect posture, sharp white suit, smile thin enough to cut paper. She stepped beside me near the ballroom windows and glanced at my untouched drink. "You should relax," she said. "Tonight's a celebration." "Is it?" I asked. Her smile widened slightly. That expression, that polished corporate smile people use seconds before delivering bad news. A quiet pressure settled behind my ribs. "You know," she continued casually, "Ethan's been talking a lot with the board lately." "Okay." "He's restructuring leadership after Q2. There it was. Corporate language always arrived wearing silk gloves. Restructuring, realignment, optimization. Words designed to sound clean while careers bled underneath them. I kept my expression neutral. "And?" Vanessa swirled her glass slowly. "And sometimes people outgrow certain support roles." Support roles. Interesting. Not operations strategist, not international logistics coordinator, not crisis management lead. Support. I almost laughed. Instead, I looked through the ballroom toward Ethan. He stood near the center of the room surrounded by investors, one hand in his pocket, smiling like a man already celebrating tomorrow's headlines. His tailored charcoal suit looked flawless under the chandelier lights. Confident posture, relaxed grin, perfect future CEO material. People loved men like Ethan, tall, calm voice, Ivy League vocabulary. The ability to repeat someone else's ideas slowly enough that executives assumed they were brilliant. The dangerous part? Sometimes even Ethan believed his own performance. "You should talk to him," Vanessa said softly. "About what?" Another pause. Then, "Before tonight gets uncomfortable." There it was again. That strange tightening in the air. Like the atmosphere itself already knew something I didn't. Before I could answer, applause suddenly erupted across the ballroom. Ethan had stepped onto the presentation stage. Large screens illuminated behind him, glowing blue against the dark room. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said smoothly, adjusting the microphone. "Thank you for being here tonight." More applause. I watched him the same way sailors probably watch distant storms. Not afraid yet, but alert, because something in my stomach had already started whispering. Run. The presentation began. Quarterly growth projections, regional expansion, projected operational savings. Every chart I had corrected at 2:14 a.m. 3 nights ago now floated 30 feet high above the ballroom, while Ethan spoke like a visionary architect unveiling the future. The audience loved him. Of course they did. People rarely notice the person holding the building together behind the walls. Then came slide 32. My slide. Not publicly mine, obviously, but mine. The Southeast Asia liability analysis, specifically the travel risk section, specifically section 11. I felt my posture straighten slightly. Because Ethan skipped it. Not entirely. Worse, he summarized it incorrectly. And naturally, he said confidently, international personnel costs remain individually assigned under temporary overseas reassignment. My eyes narrowed. No, that wasn't what the policy said, not even close. The actual clause stated, during active corporate assignment abroad, transportation, lodging, emergency accommodations, and employee repatriation remain the financial responsibility of the company until documented completion of assignment. In simple terms, if they send employees overseas, the company remained responsible for getting them home safely unless the assignment legally ended under compliant termination procedures. And compliant termination abroad required multiple documented steps: HR review, travel coordination, notice protocol, protected access period, none of which Ethan had ever cared enough to understand, because people like Ethan assume details were decorations. I immediately pulled out my phone and opened the presentation file. Maybe he simplified the wording verbally. Maybe legal-approved alternate phrasing. Maybe my inbox refreshed. A new email appeared. Sender, Human Resources. Subject, Immediate Employment Status Update. The ballroom noise suddenly sounded very far away. I opened the email. 3 paragraphs. Cold, clinical. Effective immediately. Your employment with Halcyon Global Systems has been terminated due to organizational restructuring. No prior discussion. No transition meeting. No return coordination. No compliance notice. And directly beneath the termination language sat another sentence. Your access credentials will be disabled within 15 minutes. I stared at the screen. For a moment, my brain genuinely refused to process it. Not because I loved the company, not because I loved Ethan, but because after 5 years of fixing impossible situations across 3 continents, this was how they chose to do it? Abroad? At midnight? During an active assignment? My thumb slowly tightened around the phone. Around me, applause exploded again as Ethan finished another section of the presentation. Nobody else knew yet. Or maybe they did. Maybe that was why Vanessa looked almost sympathetic earlier. The realization spread slowly through my chest, like ice water. This had been planned, probably before we even boarded the flight. I looked toward Ethan again, and this time, I noticed something new. Avoidance. He wouldn't look at me. Interesting. Cowards often confuse distance with control. A shadow appeared beside me. Security. Hotel security accompanied by one of our internal compliance officers. Professional expressions, polite posture, embarrassed eyes. "Ms. Bennett," the compliance officer said quietly, "we need your company badge." There it was, public execution in corporate form. A nearby conversation stopped mid-sentence. Then another. You could always feel when humiliation entered a room. People sensed it the way animals sense lightning. Slowly, carefully, I removed my badge. The compliance officer accepted it without meeting my eyes. Your company access has been disabled, he continued softly. Transportation arrangements will not be covered beyond tonight. I almost smiled at that sentence. Not because it was funny, because it was catastrophically stupid. But they didn't know that yet. Neither did Ethan. He finally looked at me from across the ballroom. And then, in front of investors, executives, hotel staff, and half the regional leadership team, he laughed. Actually laughed. Then raised his glass slightly and called across the room. Guess you'll have to find your own way home. A few uncomfortable chuckles scattered through the silence. Nobody fully committed to laughing, because even rich people recognize cruelty when it arrives naked. The rain hammered harder against the ballroom windows. Singapore's skyline blurred silver behind the glass. For a second, the entire room seemed frozen between elegance and disaster. I looked at Ethan, really looked at him. The relaxed posture, the smug smile, the absolute confidence of a man who had never once checked the clauses beneath the contracts carrying his career. Then I looked back down at my phone, at the termination email, at the travel policy attachment sitting 2 lines below it, and quietly, I saved everything. Email, timestamp, travel authorization records, assignment documentation, hotel booking chain, corporate signatures, including Ethan's. Then I locked my screen, picked up my suitcase, and walked toward the lobby without another word. Behind me, the ballroom slowly resumed breathing. Conversations restarted carefully. Glasses clinked again. Music returned. But the atmosphere had changed. Like people instinctively understood they had just watched someone cut the wrong wire. And somewhere deep in the building above us, hidden inside legal archives and policy documents, nobody important ever bothered reading. Section 11 was waiting. The company just didn't know it yet. The rain outside the hotel felt warm, not comforting. Just heavy. Singapore after midnight wrapped itself around the city like wet silk, neon lights bleeding across puddles, taxi tires hissing through flooded streets, skyscrapers glowing against clouds thick enough to swallow the stars whole. I stood beneath the hotel awning with one suitcase beside me and nowhere to go. 5 years. 5 years of overnight flights, emergency calls, delayed holidays, canceled weekends, and just one more crisis conversations. And somehow it ended with a security escort and a joke in a ballroom. My phone vibrated again. Unknown number. I answered immediately. Hello? Static, then a hesitant voice. Claire? Mia, junior compliance analyst, 26 years old, brilliant. Chronically nervous, the kind of employee corporations quietly consume because she cared too much. You shouldn't call me, I said softly. I know. Her breathing sounded uneven. Listen carefully, okay? I moved farther beneath the awning while rain hammered the street beyond us. What happened? I asked. They're panicking upstairs. Interesting. Not afraid. Not yet. Panicking. About what? Silence. Then, you weren't supposed to leave the hotel. My eyes narrowed slowly. Across the street, red reflections from traffic lights slid across wet pavement like streaks of blood. What do you mean? Another pause. I saw legal arguing with Vanessa near the elevators, Mia whispered. Something about travel exposure and international assignment liability. There it was, the first crack. Small, but real. I leaned lightly against the marble column behind me. And Ethan? He thought HR already cleared everything. Of course he did. People like Ethan treated legal review the same way children treated instruction manuals. Optional. Mia, I asked quietly, did anyone actually process compliant overseas termination protocol? Dead silence, long enough to become an answer. My exhaustion suddenly transformed into something colder. Because compliant protocol required multiple things they clearly skipped: formal notice procedures, protected travel window, duty of care acknowledgement, safe repatriation coordination, temporary liability continuation, and most importantly, the company could not legally strand an employee abroad during active assignment status without assuming significant exposure if anything happened afterward, which meant the second Ethan publicly removed company support while I remained overseas under active travel authorization. Halcyon Global Systems inherited a problem large enough to wake up corporate counsel at midnight. I almost felt bad for legal. Almost. Mia, I asked carefully, who approved the termination? Officially? Yes. A deep breath crackled through the phone. Ethan pushed it through directly with Vanessa. No legal review, no compliance sign-off, no travel coordination. Perfect. Rainwater rolled off the edge of the awning beside me in shimmering streams. Far above, the hotel windows glowed gold against the storm. Somewhere on those upper floors, executives were probably still drinking 12-year-old whiskey while pretending tonight remained under control. But control is a fragile illusion, especially in corporations. One wrong email could turn million-dollar confidence into forensic evidence overnight. Claire, Mia whispered suddenly. There's more. I said nothing. The board didn't know they fired you here. That was fascinating, because international terminations during executive travel created disclosure obligations, risk disclosures, insurance complications, potential regulatory exposure, especially involving employee abandonment liability abroad. And if the board learned about it after the fact, Ethan was dead, not literally, professionally. The elevator doors behind the hotel lobby opened suddenly. Voices spilled outward, fast footsteps. I turned slightly. Vanessa emerged first, heels clicking sharply across the marble floor, phone pressed against her ear. Two legal staff followed close behind carrying tablets and folders. And then Ethan appeared, still wearing the same confident smile, but smaller now, tighter, like someone trying to hold a collapsing ceiling up with posture alone. His eyes found me immediately beneath the awning. There it was, recognition, because now he knew, not everything, but enough. He walked toward me while Vanessa continued arguing quietly into her phone. Claire, Ethan called, attempting calm authority. We need to discuss a few procedural misunderstandings. Procedural misunderstandings. Amazing. 30 minutes ago, I was apparently disposable trash. Now I was a procedural misunderstanding. I ended the call with Mia. Good luck upstairs, I said quietly. She almost laughed from pure stress. You too. The line disconnected. Ethan stopped a few feet away from me beneath the glow of the hotel entrance lights. Rain reflected across his polished shoes. You left rather dramatically, he said. I stared at him for 3 full seconds. Then, you fired me internationally during active assignment. His jaw tightened slightly. Let's not exaggerate. Exaggerate. Interesting choice of word. You terminated overseas personnel without compliant repatriation procedure, I continued evenly. You revoked support before assignment closure. Vanessa approached quickly now, expression sharpened into corporate emergency mode. Claire, she interrupted smoothly. There appears to have been confusion regarding transportation accommodations. No, I said calmly. There wasn't. Silence. The rain intensified. Behind the lobby glass, several executives were openly watching now while pretending not to. Vanessa lowered her voice. We'd prefer to resolve this professionally. That sentence nearly made me smile. Corporations only say professionally when they suddenly realize someone documented everything. Ethan folded his arms. You're acting like we committed a crime. No, I replied. I'm acting like your legal department just discovered Section 11. That landed. Hard. The micro-expression flashed across Vanessa's face instantly. There it is. Confirmation. Beautiful, silent confirmation. Ethan looked between us. What the hell is Section 11? Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. Just briefly. But enough. And suddenly the entire atmosphere shifted. because for the first time tonight, Ethan understood something horrifying. He was the only person in the conversation who didn't understand the danger. Rain crashed against the hotel glass in violent waves. Traffic lights flickered red across the wet street outside. A concierge awkwardly disappeared behind the front desk, pretending not to hear anything. Vanessa stepped closer to Ethan and lowered her voice sharply. "We should continue this privately." "No," I said softly. Both of them looked at me. I adjusted the handle of my suitcase. "You handled this publicly," I continued, "so let's stay public." Another silence. Tight. Dangerous. From somewhere deeper in the hotel, a phone began ringing repeatedly. Then another. Then another. Corporate panic has a sound if you listen carefully enough. Muted footsteps. Fast typing. Voices dropping an octave. The sudden disappearance of arrogance from important people. Ethan finally lost patience. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "She was terminated. Book her a flight and move on." Vanessa looked at him the way surgeons probably look at patients who grab scalpels. "You already told her the company wouldn't cover transportation." "So?" Vanessa stared at him. Actually stared at him. And in that exact moment, I watched realization begin crawling across Ethan's face like slow poison. Not full understanding. Worse. Partial understanding. The moment someone realizes they may have detonated something enormous without knowing how big the explosion actually is. "What exactly is the issue?" he demanded. Vanessa answered carefully. "International abandonment liability." The words hung in the humid air like thunder. Even the rain suddenly seemed quieter. Ethan blinked once, then laughed nervously. "You're kidding." Nobody joined him. Not Vanessa. Not legal. Not me. His smile weakened. "You can't seriously mean?" "She remains under active corporate travel authorization," Vanessa interrupted. "Your termination procedure failed compliance sequencing." Now Ethan looked pale. Actually pale. A passing taxi splashed water across the curb while silence swallowed the hotel entrance whole. I could practically hear the calculations happening inside Vanessa's head now. Exposure estimates, board reaction, insurance review, council escalation, potential settlement numbers, and worst of all, documentation. Because every catastrophic corporate mistake becomes infinitely more expensive once written down. Ethan suddenly looked at me again. Not arrogantly this time. Carefully. Like a man discovering the elevator cable snapped 3 floors earlier. "Claire," he said slower now, "obviously we can correct this." There it was, the pivot, the corporate survival pivot. But timing matters. And theirs had expired about 30 minutes ago in front of witnesses. I opened my phone calmly, then rotated the screen toward him. The termination email glowed between us beneath the hotel lights. Timestamp included, visible to everyone. Below it sat his public message sent moments afterward. "Find your own way home." I watched the blood drain from his face. Behind us, somewhere inside the hotel, ballroom music finally stopped completely. And for the first time all night, nobody looked comfortable anymore. If you've ever watched someone powerful realize the rules apply to them too, subscribe now. Because the next chapter is where the board wakes up, legal starts protecting itself, and one sentence inside Section 11 turns a public humiliation into a corporate nightmare. And trust me, Ethan still thinks this can be fixed with a plane ticket. At 2:16 a.m., the hotel no longer felt luxurious. It felt infected. The same marble floors still reflected chandelier light. The same soft piano music still drifted through hidden speakers. The same employees still moved carefully between polished glass tables, carrying silver trays and expensive smiles. But now tension lived inside the building like smoke, invisible, everywhere. I sat alone in the executive lounge overlooking the harbor while rain crawled across the giant windows in silver rivers. Below, Singapore shimmered under the storm. Neon signs, slow traffic, reflections breaking apart across flooded streets. My untouched tea had gone cold 20 minutes earlier. Nobody asked if I wanted another, because nobody upstairs knew what to do with me anymore. Former employee, current liability, potential legal claimant. By this point, I suspected even Halcyon's legal department wasn't fully sure. Across the lounge, two junior attorneys whispered over tablets while pretending not to watch me. One of them glanced up nervously, then immediately looked away. Interesting. That meant internal escalation had already started. Probably fast, very fast. Corporate legal departments move slowly during ordinary disasters. They move terrifyingly fast when executives create discoverable evidence in foreign jurisdictions. And Ethan? Ethan had practically gift-wrapped the evidence. Public termination, active assignment status, revoked travel support, witnesses everywhere, documented communication. I almost admired the efficiency of the collapse. Almost. My phone buzzed against the table. Unknown number. Again. This time the voice belonged to a man. Claire Bennett. Yes. This is Daniel Mercer from Internal Counsel. Calm voice, controlled, exhausted underneath, the voice of someone dragged out of bed by catastrophe. I'd like to speak with you privately regarding tonight's misunderstanding. There it was again. Misunderstanding. Corporate language for please don't sue us into extinction. I'm listening, I said. A soft sigh crackled through the line. We're arranging revised accommodations and immediate transportation assistance. After terminating me internationally, pause. We're reviewing procedural irregularities. Procedural irregularities. Beautiful phrase. Like calling a shipwreck an unexpected moisture event. I stared through the rain-covered windows toward the harbor lights below. Daniel, I asked quietly, did legal approve the termination before execution? Silence. Not hesitation. Silence. The dangerous kind. Because lawyers understand silence better than anyone. I can't discuss internal review processes, he replied carefully. That answered the question perfectly. No approval, no review, no compliance sequence. Just Ethan playing emperor in front of investors until reality arrived carrying gasoline. The lounge doors opened behind me. Footsteps approached. Vanessa. Still flawless somehow, despite the hour. Though now small fractures showed beneath the surface. Tension around the eyes, tighter posture. The controlled breathing of someone trying not to lose control publicly. Claire, she said carefully. May we sit? Plural. Interesting. I turned slightly. Ethan stood several feet behind her near the doorway. And suddenly I understood everything. He didn't want to come alone. Because confidence disappears quickly once lawyers start using phrases like liability exposure. Daniel's voice returned through the phone. Ms. Bennett? I'll call you back, I said quietly. Then ended the call. Vanessa sat first. Ethan remained standing for a moment before finally taking the opposite chair across from me. Nobody spoke immediately. Rain hammered the windows harder. The harbor lights blurred silver and blue across the glass like melting electricity. Finally, Ethan leaned forward. I think tonight got unnecessarily emotional. I actually laughed, not loudly, just once, because of course he would say emotional. Men like Ethan always describe consequences as emotions, once consequences start applying to them personally. You fired me abroad in front of clients? It was restructuring. You told me to find my own way home. His jaw tightened. I was angry. And stupid. Vanessa immediately intervened. Let's keep this constructive. Constructive. Another beautiful corporate word. I folded my hands calmly across the table. Constructive would have been following compliant overseas termination procedure. Ethan exhaled sharply. We've already offered corrective accommodations. No, I replied. You offered damage control. That landed directly. Vanessa's expression shifted slightly again. Tiny movements fascinated me tonight, because polished executives spend years learning emotional control. But panic leaks anyway. In the eyes, the jaw, the breathing, especially around lawyers. "We'd like to resolve this internally," Vanessa said carefully. "Internally?" I asked softly. "You disabled my credentials before midnight." No answer. "Who informed the board?" I continued. Another silence. There it is. Nobody yet. Of course, because once the board learned international liability attached to a public executive humiliation stunt, the questions would become lethal. Who approved this? Who bypassed counsel? Who ignored compliance? Who created exposure? And most importantly, who documented it? Ethan shifted in his chair. "This is getting blown out of proportion." Vanessa closed her eyes briefly again. Second time tonight, a terrible sign. "Ethan," she said quietly, "please stop talking." The room went still. Even the attorneys across the lounge froze for half a second. Because that sentence told me everything. Legal had already started separating itself from him. That happens early during executive disasters. First comes concern, then distance, then documentation, and eventually, sacrifice. I leaned back slightly. "You still haven't answered the important question." Neither of them spoke, so I answered it myself. "You never actually ended my assignment." Vanessa's face lost color. Ethan looked confused again, still confused. Incredible. I almost envied people capable of surviving this long without understanding their own contracts. "Claire," Vanessa started. "No," I interrupted calmly. "The travel authorization remains active, which means under Section 11, the company remained responsible for employee welfare, transportation, emergency lodging, and repatriation obligations." Ethan rubbed his forehead hard now. "This is insane." "No," I said quietly. "This is documented." That word hit harder than anger ever could. Documented. Because corporations can survive scandals, sometimes even lawsuits. But documentation? Documentation kills careers, especially timestamp documentation. My phone vibrated again. This time, an internal email notification appeared on screen. Interesting. Very interesting. Because my access should have been disabled completely by now, which meant someone in IT had temporarily restored limited permissions. Not for me, for themselves. Panic recovery mode. I opened the message silently, then smiled slightly. Vanessa noticed immediately. "What is it?" I rotated the screen toward her. The email header displayed, "Urgent, board notification draft review, sent accidentally to the wrong distribution group. Classic." Underneath sat the sentence that changed the atmosphere completely. "Potential exposure involving overseas employee abandonment and non-compliant executive termination action. No names yet, but enough." Oh, that was bad. That was very bad. Because once legal starts drafting board notifications before sunrise, executive protection usually ends shortly afterward. Ethan read the screen twice, then a third time. His face finally changed completely. Not irritation, not arrogance, fear, real fear. Outside, thunder rolled across Singapore Harbor, low and distant. The lounge lights reflected pale gold across Ethan's motionless face. And suddenly, he understood the scale. Not the entire disaster, but enough to realize something critical. This was no longer an HR issue. This was now a board-level survival problem. Vanessa stood abruptly. "We need to contain communications immediately." Contain. Another corporate emergency word. Ethan stood too fast, nearly knocking the chair backward. "What happens if this reaches regulators?" Nobody answered him, which was answer enough, because foreign labor exposure, executive misconduct, travel liability violations, and documented abandonment issues crossing jurisdictions. That combination attracts attention very quickly, especially when investors are present. especially when witnesses exist, especially when somebody publicly humiliates an employee moments before creating the liability. I slowly closed my phone, then looked directly at Ethan. "For 5 years," I said softly, "I fixed problems before they reached you." The rain battered the glass harder behind me. Lightning flickered somewhere across the skyline. "And tonight," I continued, "you made sure this one couldn't be fixed quietly." Silence, heavy, final. Somewhere upstairs, elevators opened repeatedly as more executives arrived unexpectedly back to the hotel conference floors. Phones rang, doors shut sharply. Voices moved faster now. The building itself felt awake. Corporate insomnia, the most expensive kind, and deep inside Halcyon's legal servers, attached permanently to timestamps nobody could erase anymore. Section 11 had officially become radioactive. By 4:40 a.m., nobody in the hotel was pretending anymore. The smiles were gone. The executive confidence was gone. Even the lobby flowers somehow looked nervous. The entire upper conference floor of the hotel had transformed into a corporate emergency bunker. Lawyers moving quickly between meeting rooms, assistants carrying printed binders nobody had time to read properly. Exhausted executives whispering beside glowing laptops while rain rattled against the glass walls overlooking Singapore Harbor. And at the center of the storm stood Ethan. Alone now. That part fascinated me most. 3 hours earlier, he'd been surrounded by investors, board members, HR leadership, regional directors, and people laughing at his jokes. Now, every conversation near him ended quickly. People stepped away the moment legal entered rooms. Nobody wanted proximity to liability, especially documented liability. I sat near the corner of the executive lounge with my suitcase beside me and watched the unraveling happen in real time. A strange calm had settled over me. Not happiness, not revenge, something colder. The feeling you get when someone spends years ignoring structural cracks and then suddenly hears the building move underneath them. Across the room, giant screens displayed muted financial news, while thunder rolled somewhere far beyond the harbor skyline. The hotel air conditioning felt too cold now. Or maybe everyone's blood pressure had simply crashed. At 4:52 a.m., the elevators opened again. This time the atmosphere shifted instantly. Not subtle, instant. Because when older executives walk into rooms during emergencies, younger executives stop pretending they're important. 3 people stepped out, 2 legal advisors, and behind them, Margaret Vale, board chair, late 60s, silver hair, dark green suit, sharp enough to look military under the lobby lights. Calm posture. No wasted movement. I had only met her twice. Both times she spoke very little. People like Margaret never needed volume. Entire careers adjusted themselves automatically when she entered rooms. The conversations across the lounge died almost immediately. Ethan straightened so fast, it looked painful. Vanessa went pale. Margaret didn't acknowledge either of them at first. She walked directly toward me instead. Interesting. Very interesting. "Ms. Bennett," she said calmly. Her voice carried that dangerous executive softness that usually appeared seconds before companies exploded internally. "Mrs. Vale, I understand you've had a difficult evening." That sentence alone told me legal already briefed her fully. Not partially, fully. I stood slowly. She glanced once at my suitcase beside the chair, then at the rain-covered windows overlooking the harbor, then back at me. "Would you join us upstairs?" Not a request. Not exactly. An invitation wrapped around a corporate evacuation effort. I looked past her toward Ethan. He wouldn't meet my eyes anymore. That alone was almost worth the overnight disaster. Almost. We moved toward Conference Room Atlas on the 46th floor. Even the elevator ride felt tense. Nobody spoke. Only the quiet hum of machinery and distant thunder vibrating through the building. Margaret stood with her hands folded calmly, while legal advisors avoided eye contact entirely. Vanessa looked exhausted now. Not tired, cornered. There's a difference. Inside Atlas, the atmosphere hit like cold steel. Massive glass walls overlooked the sleeping city below. Rain distorted the skyline into streaks of silver and blue. Half-empty coffee cups covered the conference table beside scattered legal documents and glowing tablets. At least 9 people were already inside. Corporate counsel, risk management, insurance representatives, 2 board members attending remotely through giant screens, and 1 travel compliance specialist who looked seconds away from cardiac arrest. Nobody smiled when I entered. Good. That meant the situation was finally being treated honestly. Margaret took the head chair slowly, then spoke the sentence Ethan had probably feared all night. Let's establish the timeline. Legal counsel immediately began. Employee Claire Bennett remained under active international assignment authorization at the time of termination execution. I watched Ethan carefully. His posture was collapsing inch by inch now. Termination action occurred publicly during ongoing corporate travel. Another attorney continued. Travel support was verbally revoked prior to compliant repatriation sequencing. The compliance specialist swallowed hard before adding, documented communication may constitute abandonment exposure under regional employment and travel duty provisions. May constitute. Lawyers love cautious wording. But panic lives underneath cautious wording beautifully. Margaret listened without interrupting once. That was the terrifying part. Calm executives are infinitely more dangerous than angry ones. Finally, she turned toward Ethan. Did you review legal clearance before terminating Ms. Bennett abroad? Silence. Ethan shifted slightly. I believed HR handled compliance. Margaret turned slowly toward Vanessa. Did HR receive counsel approval? Vanessa hesitated. Tiny mistake. Tiny, but deadly in boardrooms. We were informed the restructuring could proceed. That wasn't an answer. Margaret noticed immediately. So did everyone else. Did counsel approve overseas execution? She repeated. No. There it was. The room changed temperature instantly. Even through the storm outside, even through the air conditioning, even through the polished corporate professionalism, you could feel the damage land. One of the remote board members removed his glasses slowly. Another muted himself entirely. The insurance representative began typing immediately. Fast, very fast, because insurance people start documenting before everyone else understands the explosion radius. Margaret folded her hands calmly, then looked directly at Ethan. Why was Ms. Bennett publicly dismissed? He opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. It escalated emotionally. That answer was catastrophic, not because it sounded bad, because it sounded personal. And personal executive actions create personal executive liability. The attorneys exchanged quick glances instantly. I saw it happen, tiny, sharp, like sharks smelling blood underwater. Margaret remained expressionless. Did you instruct her to arrange independent return travel? Ethan's silence lasted too long. Way too long. Because silence becomes confession once lawyers start recording meetings. Finally, yes. No thunder, no dramatic music, no shouting, just silence. Pure corporate silence. The kind that ends careers quietly behind glass walls at 5 a.m. Outside, lightning flashed across Singapore Harbor, illuminating the rain in white streaks across the conference windows. Margaret turned toward legal counsel. What is our exposure? The lead attorney inhaled carefully. Potentially significant. Translation? Disaster. He continued. Given the active assignment status, documented communication, witness presence, and executive conduct involved, nobody moved. We may be facing labor liability exposure, executive misconduct review, insurance complications, and potential regulatory scrutiny depending on jurisdictional interpretation. The room felt smaller suddenly, much smaller. Ethan rubbed his face hard with both hands now. Vanessa stared silently at the table, and for the first time since the ballroom incident began, Nobody treated me like the weakest person in the room anymore. Because power changes instantly once risk enters the building. Margaret finally looked toward me again. "Ms. Bennett," she said calmly, "have you retained outside counsel yet?" Every head in the room turned toward me. That question mattered enormously. Because once outside counsel enters, internal containment usually dies immediately. I answered honestly, "No." A subtle shift moved across the room. Relief. Temporary relief. Margaret nodded once, then said something that nearly made Ethan stop breathing entirely. "Good. Then perhaps we still have a narrow opportunity to prevent this from becoming irreversible." Prevent, not solve. Prevent. That distinction mattered. A lot. Because the board already understood something Ethan still struggled to accept. The company's problem was no longer the termination. The problem was the evidence. Public evidence. Time-stamped evidence. Witnessed evidence. Evidence attached directly to executive behavior. And somewhere inside Halcyon's servers, preserved forever beneath metadata nobody could fully erase, that email still existed. "Find your own way home. 3 seconds of arrogance. Potentially worth millions by sunrise." Ethan finally looked at me again across the long conference table. But now, the expression had completely changed. No superiority, no mockery, no executive confidence. Just the hollow stare of a man realizing his own words had followed him into the boardroom like fingerprints at a crime scene. And outside the glass walls of Conference Room Atlas, Singapore slowly began turning gray with approaching dawn. The worst possible moment for the lawyers, because daylight meant markets would open soon. And once markets opened, containment became much harder. At 6:08 a.m., the rain finally stopped. Singapore emerged slowly from the storm like a city pretending nothing had happened overnight. The streets below filled with early traffic. Harbor lights faded against the pale gray horizon. Somewhere near the marina, the first commuter trains began moving through the city with mechanical precision, while exhausted hotel staff quietly replaced coffee trays outside conference rooms full of people whose careers were actively collapsing. Conference Room Atlas smelled like cold espresso and fear. Nobody had slept. Not legal, not HR. Definitely not Ethan. He looked 10 years older than he had in the ballroom. Amazing what a few hours and one documented mistake can do to a human face. The giant screens along the conference room walls now displayed revised exposure assessments, travel policy documentation, and internal communications chains pulled directly from Halcyon servers. Every few minutes, another notification appeared. More emails, more witness statements, more timeline confirmations. Disasters grow while executives are awake. That's the cruel part. Margaret Vale remained calm through all of it, still composed, still terrifying. She sat at the head of the table reviewing printed policy documents with slow precision, while the legal department quietly dismantled Ethan's night piece by piece. Timestamp confirms employee remained under active assignment authorization until 1:14 a.m. local time. Another attorney added, public verbal revocation occurred approximately 31 minutes earlier. Then another voice, termination sequence failed protected travel compliance requirements under internal mobility policy. Each sentence sounded clinical, small, almost harmless individually. But together they sounded like dirt landing on a coffin. Across the table, Ethan suddenly pushed back from his chair. "This is insane," he snapped. "You're all acting like I stranded someone in the wilderness." Nobody answered immediately, because angry executives always think volume changes documentation. It doesn't. Margaret slowly removed her glasses, and somehow that movement felt louder than his outburst. "You publicly terminated an employee overseas during active assignment," she said calmly, then instructed her to arrange independent return travel after revoking company support. Ethan exhaled sharply. "I didn't think—" "No," Margaret interrupted softly. "You didn't." Silence swallowed the room whole. One of the younger attorneys actually stopped typing. That sentence would travel through the company for years. I could already tell. Ethan stared toward the windows overlooking the brightening skyline. And for the first time since this nightmare began, he looked small. Not physically, professionally. Like a man suddenly discovering the company logo on his business card no longer functioned as armor. Meanwhile, legal kept moving. Because legal departments don't care about emotions once survival mode activates. Only exposure, only containment, only evidence. A compliance specialist projected another document onto the main screen. My travel authorization file, complete, every extension, every approval signature, every executive acknowledgement, including Ethan's direct approval from 6 days earlier. The room went quiet again. The specialist cleared his throat carefully. Under Section 11, he said, assignment responsibility remains active until compliant closure documentation is executed and acknowledged by all operational parties. Then came the sentence that ended whatever remained of Ethan's confidence. No compliant closure exists in this case. There it was, final, clean, professional, fatal. Ethan rubbed both hands over his face slowly. Vanessa looked physically ill now. The insurance representatives whispered urgently near the far side of the table, while outside counsel joined remotely on another screen. Outside counsel. That was important. Companies only involve external firms when internal legal teams stop believing they can contain the damage alone. Margaret finally turned toward me. Ms. Bennett, she said carefully, Halcyon intends to fully restore your travel accommodations immediately. Interesting wording again. Restore. As if the company desperately wanted reality rewritten retroactively. She continued. Additionally, we would like to discuss a formal resolution package. There it was, the landing pad. Fast settlement attempt before regulators, insurers, or investors became fully involved. I glanced toward Ethan. His eyes stayed fixed on the table. Not once had he apologized. Fascinating. Some people would rather drown than admit they pushed the wrong person into the water. One of the board members on screen leaned forward. What concerns me most, he said, is the witness exposure. Exactly. Not the legality, not the ethics, the witnesses. Because corporations survive private mistakes every day. Public mistakes become narratives, and narratives become headlines. Especially when rich executives humiliate employees publicly before legal exposure appears hours later. The attorney beside Margaret nodded grimly. We currently have 23 identifiable witnesses from the ballroom event, including external investors. 23. I noticed Ethan close his eyes briefly, probably imagining exactly how many people now possessed both the memory and documentation of his little performance. Find your own way home, loser. Some sentences age badly in under 6 hours. Margaret folded her hands again, then looked directly at Ethan. Pending final review, she said calmly, the board will be initiating executive conduct investigation procedures. There it was, the real ending. Not dramatic, not cinematic, corporate, which is always colder. Ethan looked up instantly. You can't seriously be blaming this entirely on me. Dangerous sentence. Very dangerous. Because panicked executives often start dragging others down while trying to stay afloat. Vanessa's expression changed immediately. So did legal's. Internal alliances were dying in real time now. Margaret didn't even blink. You executed the termination personally. You approved the restructuring. Restructuring, Margaret replied softly, is not the issue before us. God, that line hit like surgical steel. You could practically hear the legal department mentally underlining it for future transcripts. Outside, dawn sunlight finally broke through the clouds over Singapore Harbor. Soft gold reflections spread across the conference room windows. Beautiful morning, terrible day for Ethan. An assistant entered quietly, carrying fresh printed documents, settlement drafts, travel reinstatement agreements, temporary confidentiality proposals, fast paperwork, very fast paperwork. That told me something else, too. The company wanted this buried before American business hours began, before investor calls, before internal leaks, before somebody from the ballroom posted anything online. Because once public humiliation stories mix with legal exposure narratives, the internet does the rest for free. Margaret slid a document folder gently across the table toward me. "No pressure to respond immediately," she said. "You may review this with counsel if you wish." Professional, measured, controlled. Everything Ethan had failed to be. I placed one hand lightly on the folder, but didn't open it yet. Then I looked across the table at Ethan one final time. The expensive suit, the sleepless eyes, the collapsed posture, the silent realization settling heavier across his face minute by minute. 5 years earlier, I had joined Halcyon because Ethan promised the company rewarded loyalty. Tonight, I finally understood something important. Corporations don't reward loyalty. They reward usefulness. And the moment someone powerful forgets who keeps disasters from reaching them, they usually meet reality very quickly. Sometimes in conference rooms, sometimes in lawsuits, sometimes in silence. The board members began disconnecting one by one from the video screens. Legal teams gathered documents. Phones started ringing again as Europe slowly woke up. The crisis would continue for days now, maybe weeks. Investigations, internal reviews, executive negotiations, insurance assessments, possible settlements. But my part in the night was already finished. I stood slowly beside the giant conference windows overlooking the bright Singapore skyline, then picked up my suitcase. Nobody stopped me this time. Nobody asked for my badge. Nobody laughed. And as I walked toward the conference room doors, the sunrise spread across the harbor behind me in brilliant gold reflections, while somewhere deep inside Halcyon Global Systems, buried forever in legal archives and executive review files, Section 11 remained, waiting patiently beside one irreversible sentence. The company is liable. Silence.